right, this is hello, members of the audience, Judy, Marianne. This is the Open Space Committee. I'm Betsy Morgan Thaler, and would like to bring the meeting to order. And
I can get it.
we have a quorum here, so we're officially starting the meeting.
You're in business.
And may I have a roll call starting with Gary?
Gary is here.
Nona. And okay, that's Jackie Magno. And more about Jackie in a moment. And we have two members in the schoolhouse, two audience members with us in the schoolhouse. Thank you for coming, and 3 online. So with that, I would like to call for oral communications. Anyone in the schoolhouse with anything to say at this point? Anyone online with anything to say? Bev, did I hear you earlier? You or Peter suggest that you wanted to make an oral communication? Or is this?
I don't, I'm here.
Oh, it's wonderful.
I'm listening. I'm listening because I care, but don't get me started on open space or you won't go get the rest of the meeting done. Okay. Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, well, we're very happy to have you too. All right, then I will personally be making an oral communications. I will say I'm sorry that Terry Lee and Carter are not yet here. So what I will do is make the oral communication to get it in the record, and we will call for an informal process around this item when they arrive. This is a report because it's not on our agenda. At our last March 6th meeting, we discussed at great length the Fogarty parcel at the top of Skyline. And staff is prepared to move forward with a Fogarty appraisal so that we can appropriately bracket its value, and they might begin conversations from that point. And that's the good news. To be thorough, and this is more good news, to be thorough, the town is circling back with the Open Space Committee to make sure and gain clarity that as a potential open space acquisition, that the motion that we passed, and I will read it, that recommends to the town council to take next steps in the possible acquisition of the parcel. That's the important clause, that included implicitly, if not explicitly, the cost of the appraisal and associated next steps as an open space fund expense. Now that I've said that, we have Carter with us, and welcome, Judith. A special welcome back from mountaineering. And Carter, I'm going to repeat my oral communication so that we can get a collective assent here. Staff is asking that we make clear to them so that they can proceed to hire the appraiser to bracket the value of Fogarty. Staff would like to clarify that we intended to include, we didn't explicitly include this, but we implicitly included underwriting the cost of the appraiser. What we recommended to the town council was that they take next steps in the possible acquisition of the parcel. As a part of that, we offered at least one idea of a good appraiser out there. So we knew that implied hiring an appraiser. So the staff would feel most comfortable if the Open Space Committee would show their assent for that intention. I think it was a part of our Vulcan mind meld, but it would be good just to get the nod here. It won't be a formal vote because it's not on our agenda, but I'm seeing Carter nod. I'm seeing Gary nod. Nona?
I suspect we're all in agreement on this, but I guess out of due diligence, we should ask about how much will it cost?
You know, I inquired casually, a couple months ago. And I think the answer was around 10-ish. 10 to 20? 10 to 20. Great, always appropriate. Excellent question. Jackie is nodding in affirmatively, and so I think that that provides the answer. If, I'm sure staff will get back to us if they need this to be a formally recorded vote, but I thought a month from now would be a bit too late. So thank you, committee. And with that, we will move on to the outstanding minutes of March 6th. Complete as they are, does anyone have any additions or corrections to the minutes? I don't see anyone with more to offer. Gary, were you leaning forward? Okay, motion to,
Yes, I move to approve the minutes.
okay, motion. Thank you, Carter, for the second, and so moved. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Thank you. So that brings us to membership and time to acknowledge a couple of important committee changes. Foremost, I want to allow for the truly significant contributions of our fellow committee member Bev Lippman, who formally retired since our March 6th meeting. Your work, Bev, you're online, and your work preceded membership in this committee. I know it will follow, but it is painful to say goodbye to you. You've meant the world. I have thought of you as like a lantern, and someone leading the rest of us down the path. And so I feel a little sentimental and poignant about this moment, though I know that you will still be the stalwart that you have been for us. So any members want to chime in? Gary,
Yeah.
you brought Bev to us.
How many of you make frequent trips up Shady Trail? You've all been up there. How many times have you seen Bev up there?
Almost all of them.
Say, yeah, good, 30–40% of the time there, we see her with a big bag of noxious weeds.
Yeah. And how.
Thank you.
And
Yeah,
how. And thank you, Gary, for really, you brought Bev to the committee. So you get a halo.
Okay.
I'd like to acknowledge another place that Bev hangs out, although you don't usually see her because she's bending over weeding at Poppy Corner where Alpine Road and Portola Road intersect. And it's thanks to her that in most years we see glorious poppies there.
We know that's your true love, hands-on all the way. So thank you, Bev, for availing so much of yourself to the committee and to the town. And with that, welcome aboard, Jackie. And it is just such an incredible pleasure. Already today, I have been coming in with Nona 30 minutes before the meeting start to get us off to a 10-minute late start because the IT has flummoxed us so many times. And this time we had 15 extra minutes to just chat because Jackie's proficiency is quite something. So we're very happy. And I'm going to move quickly into the nominations for a secretary because last time we were together in March, Jackie did not shrink from the suggestion that she might be willing to take over these responsibilities that Nona has carried. I would like to say lightly, but it's a big responsibility and Nona has measured up to it in every conceivable way and then some for the last year. So thank you for the extraordinary minutes taking that we've enjoyed over the last year. The record is as good as it gets. Thank you, Nona. And with that, I would like to call for nominations.
I'd nominate Jackie as our secretary.
Thank you, Carter.
second here.
Thanks, Gary. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Oh, boy, I like a unanimous decision. Thank you. So that brings us to then the substantive comment at hand being an update on Dorothy Ford Park and open space. I have put on in front of some of you, all of you,
There's another picture.
Okay, sorry, I was supposed to pass these down.
I guess we'll go-
okay, so we're going to just review where we are on Dorothy Ford Park and open space. The council met on April 9th and then again on April 23rd and passed ordinance that is in your hand, ordinance number 2025-452, passed on April 23rd while our mayor was on her mountain trek. It passed 4-3. At the top of the page 3, the relevant detail that it's passed, did I say 4-3? I meant to say 3-1. It passed 3-1. Yes, I took care to point out that you were not there, and thank you for adding. My arithmetic was off. So let the record state. 3-1, it passed. The amendment that was approved will be a part of our Muni Code, Chapter 18.15.04, Development Standards. I will read it quickly. A 2.48 acre portion of the Dorothy Ford Park site, which shall exclude the existing Little League baseball field and the adjacent surface parking lot serving the baseball field, shall be permitted to be developed as high-density housing, and that owner-occupied and rental multifamily uses are allowed by right for housing developments in which 20% or more of the units are affordable to lower-income households on the specified portion of the Dorothy Ford Park site. So that is, that's the addition to our Muni Code. I will call for comment in a minute, but let me just point out the good news is that it does not include a rezoning portion of it. So there, we are trying as a town to forestall that, and more about that in a moment. The difficulty, of course, is that we all know that 2.48 acres, particularly when it explicitly excludes the Little League baseball field and adjacent surface parking lot, don't exist. So we're passing forward that issue, which has existed since 2022. It also makes it a little more likely that it will be developed if you can build 80% market rate housing there. So it becomes more impendent that we look very hard for alternative sites. I could call on Judith if you'd like to report on behalf of the town manager and their conversation, or would, following the meeting,
You mean on their HCD conversation?
yes.
No, they met with HCD. Terrence had worked with the individual that is now in charge of our certification. And they went into the background. It's a first meeting with this person and Mark and Terrence. So they weren't going to commit to anything. they just said, oh, that's very interesting. Thank you. But I think any face-to-face, I don't know if it was face-to-face or Zoom, um, contact is a good thing. And they just said, okay, we'll take it and consider it. So it wasn't a no, it wasn't a, oh, you're done. And we are where we pretty much expected to be. We didn't expect them to be able to say definitively within an hour that they're comfortable or they're not, or they're directionally, but they felt it was a productive tone, that there was a lot of good listening going on and questions being asked. So
And was
Thank
there
you.
any, do you know if we got any kind of a sense of timing about when we will hear more? or-
well, no. I mean, we had hoped in 3 to 4 weeks, but their history in meeting any actual deadline has been problematic. And I'm not even sure there is a rule for this particular situation, because we had sent them a message. We were planning to complete our certification zoning steps months ago, before we had to rethink how to do that. So it wasn't really the right moment to say, okay, now we're done. What are you going to do for us? But I expect Mark will be quite involved in keeping tabs on the next steps. So it is a good time to evaluate the other options in the interim, but that's what I have. So
Super. Thank you for
let's-
what you have.
Yeah, thank you.
Um, That could be it. And if there are questions or comments, this would be the moment. Terry Lee, welcome. We might be talked out on this subject. Fair enough. So then that brings us to the Maintenance Subcommittee report. Mona and Gary.
So I'll start off. Gary, please chime in at any point.
I'll
And-
chime in right now and apologize for not making the meeting.
Well, you've made many meetings in the past, so you are excused. But we do also have here today Judy Murphy, who is on the conservation end of the subcommittee. This is a joint subcommittee between open space and conservation. And at the last meeting, which was 2 weeks ago, Judy was present, Nancy Frere was present also from conservation, and I was there as well. And the purpose of that meeting was to review and reevaluate where we are this year in terms of the priorities that we established for Springdown in particular, which in the past has involved a written out calendar of mowings to control weeds and grasses and to promote wildflowers, and also actual weeding by Go Native to try and transition this meadow into a real native wildflower meadow. In the past, it worked great, but that was several years ago to say 6 years ago. And in the last few years, it really hasn't worked very well. And in particular, we thought we were getting back on track this year, but it turned out that with staff departures and chains of responsibility for overseeing contracts and things like that, the first mowing didn't happen when it would have needed to happen to control invasive grasses. And the bottom line is that there are a lot of moving parts and a lot of people involved. And even though there's a lot of institutional memory in the town staff who actually are responsible for open spaces in Portola Valley, we're not at a point where things can run smoothly. And so our recommendation at this point is to maintain the meadow for fire risk reduction, mowing as needed, to do weeding when possible for things like the thistle, major weeds that are generally later in the season when we have the ball rolling and when Go Native knows their schedule better. To do limbing up when it's needed. And so to use the open space fund that we recommended for spring down maintenance, to use those for some of the core activities, but to hold back for now on the stuff that isn't working. So that's the recommendation that Judy made to conservation at the meeting last week. And this is the same, I'm making the same recommendation now to this committee. I'd invite Judy to say anything more if I've left anything out, but go to the mic.
Yeah, it's,
The only thing is that since we met and talked, I had some correspondence with Justin. And he said that they've got scheduled for mowings, but there isn't currently anything in the budget for the hand weeding, and that would have to be specifically appropriate, that he didn't have the ability, that the committees can't tell them what kind of work to do. And he didn't have the ability to just do the work. So they need some sort of a chain of command. And I don't know whether that's as simple as you guys just saying that you will pay for the 2 days of weeding, or whether upstream, the new engineer needs to approve it and then you give the money. It's not, the bureaucracy of it's not clear to me, but that's where it currently stands.
Okay, so let me just respond to that. So this is also news to me because we decided that Judy would be the representative to Justin. So we recommended to the council that 65,000 be allocated from the open space fund for this fiscal year to do both mowing and weeding. And of that, about 40,000 was for the weeding, was my understanding. So I don't know if that actually happened. So, and it sounds like maybe it didn't. Or at least Justin doesn't
You
know that it
these
did.
days What's
Yeah.
happened with it.
So we
I
have
can
some-
close that circle again and say that you had appropriated that amount of money.
Well, we recommended that.
Ah,
We,
got it. You
you know,
recommended
as
it,
an
right.
advisory body to the
So
council.
Judith, do you remember anything that happened?
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
All right.
is
So-
it,
Yeah, Justin would probably be able to see what had arrived in the Public Works budget. And so we could work from that.
Yeah. the
we know
goal
it
is
was
to keep
approved
it
at the town
slightly
council.
separate
meeting.
from
We know it was approved at the town council meeting.
Yeah. And the goal is partly to keep it slightly separate from the public works budget so that we can figure out what gets spent for what going forward. Yeah.
Well, I'll circle back
But
with that
we can
more
coordinate them.
detail. Okay.
Gary, do you have anything more to add?
May I, a question of maybe Judith. Judith, do you expect that the arrival of the town engineer, who I know has already been out active in the field working on various projects, will help to liberate greater fluidity here? Will he be serving as he becomes more familiar with the town as a conduit and in somewhat the capacity of Howard?
So there's 2 components. One is he has to get his bearings. This was his first week. He seemed very eager. He's been working, for example, on the Jim White's property to get it opened, and
Could you remind us his name? If you remember.
Robert, yeah, what's his last name? Bert.
Thank you.
Yeah, and he attended our meeting last night, and he'll be around, so he'll be quite eager. But he has to get his bearings. But then secondly, I think there is this question of how the accounting works for maintenance funds. If it comes out of your funds, that's a special allocated fund, versus general fund, which would be the public works. And I think Robert needs to get his bearings with Tony and Mark on how to think about that. And I think that's just been too much for him to be able to absorb in 1 week. But I would think both, if you circle back and clarify with Justin what his understanding is, I think Mark and some combination of Mark and Robert and Tony needs to give more clear guidance for them when they can avail themselves of it, what was approved. You know, is Justin just thinking of the general fund, or was he actually thinking of the open space fund for maintenance?
And other questions that would occur to me last May, June, I guess it was, when we presented an open space fund allowance, so to speak, that the council approved. If that has not been used, if it's been used to just mow any old time that suits the town subcontractors, but doesn't work for open space maintenance, then I'm going to guess that our funds will be left alone. Is that a correct assumption?
I have no idea. We have to get Mark and staff to understand clearly from Tony how Tony would allocate the costs of these maintenance activities in theory. And then in practice, if you are having special purview over, this is going to be an effective way to do the maintenance and that's what we're willing to spend, there needs to be some education on that, is my guess. Because there's a lot of history here that Robert won't come to the table with, and it probably needs a special session. So I'll raise with Mark the fact that we've got to figure out the rules of the road, so to speak, with regard to when you have to communicate your preference for maintenance and methodology and the like, and you know which fund it's coming out of and why. I think there's probably some lack of clarity.
Which fund it's coming out of and why, or why not? If, for
Yeah.
instance, the mowing was off kilter to the needs of open space and
Right.
conservation. Yeah, that would be very helpful. And then I guess my follow-up question here is, let's say that the funds, were not, the mowing didn't happen at an appropriate time. So the funds are still sitting there because it didn't serve the purpose, but they might be spent now on the weeding that we foresee in the future. And so those kinds of issues, it would be, I think, really wonderful if a member of the subcommittee could be a part of this conversation so it
Yeah.
achieves multiple
Yeah,
purposes.
I would recommend that. A short, quick meeting could do a lot to clarify some of this. And we are coming up at the end of the fiscal year. I would ask what's left over in this fund for this year and what's been done. If I were you, I'd want that accounting, like not to the dollar, but just, do we have anything left? And then how do we administer this going forward? That's a bigger question for Robert to help weigh in on as he
Right.
gets his bearings.
Right.
So the one additional thing I would say is that we sort of decided to take a 2-year hiatus in our attempt to fine tune and maximize the wildflowers because of staffing issues, because of financial issues. Thought we'd just let it all breathe for a while before we sort of hit it hard again with the sort of specificity and annoyingly precise schedule that we want, that's based on the weather. You can't really plan it ahead for them. It's based on all kinds of things. It doesn't mean it's still not in service of making sure it's a good wildlife and wildflower place soon. So I wouldn't say that because we're mowing less aggressively for wildflowers doesn't mean suddenly it's not appropriate for open space. It's to keep it in the best shape we can. And then in 2 years, reevaluate, should we try a new method altogether from the one that we've been doing that might have more success?
Thank you for that. It sounds quite pragmatic for where we all are right now, and less wear and tear at a time, achievable objectives. And I think the only thing that I would, since we have new staff and we all are creatures of habit, I would at the same time want to put out there that this is not the new, this is a temporary holding pattern. Yeah. Any questions around the dais, committee members? Any other comments? Thank you, Nona. Thank you, Judith. And I don't see any hand raised online, so that will then bring us to a really exciting, I'm so happy that this, that this subject has surfaced at this particular time. So there's been a lot of interest around town, you know, tragedies have a way of, we can make lemonade out of lemons, so to speak. Tragedies are very focusing. With the loss of the recent mountain lion on Portola Road, not far from here, we became more and more aware of the value of our wildlife, of caring for our wildlife, and of thinking forward with the tremendous help of thank you to the state legislature for Assembly Bill 1889, which accompanied this package, and has further focused our attention on how are we going to protect, what do we already know that we have in the way of wildlife corridors, accounting for them and doing what level best we can to protect them or to grow them as development, as we foresee development and housing continues to find its way in Portola Valley. So with that, I'd like to turn the meeting over to Nona, who's done a fair amount of work on this in the past, and then open it up to really full committee participation, because this is going to be at least a 1 year's project, probably longer, and in tandem with our sister committee, open conservation. Thank you. I'm very hung up on open space. And of which we have 2 members here today. So, Nona.
Okay, so as Betsy said, I think our goal here is to have a really sort of open exploratory conversation about what wildlife protection and wildlife corridors might mean in Portola Valley. And to just sort of set the stage, I wanted to read a couple of sentences from the bill, just especially if people online aren't up to speed on it completely. And so this is from section 1A4 of the Senate bill, and it states, the public trust doctrine holds that wildlife is held in trust for the people and that the protection and conservation of fish and wildlife is of utmost public interest. The California Constitution grants cities and counties the power to control and organize development within their boundaries as a means of serving the general welfare. Because cities and counties have the power to control development decisions within their boundaries, they have a responsibility under the public trust doctrine to do so in a manner that protects fish and wildlife and habitat connectivity. It is therefore the policy of the state to protect, restore, and improve the functioning of fish, wildlife, and habitat connectivity through local government land use planning and zoning. So I won't get to the section which actually sort of says what needs to happen down the road, because it's down the road in a couple of years when the general plan and the conservation element in particular are revisited. But I wanted to sort of take up where Betsy left off in terms of thinking of this as an opportunity to build on the heightened interest that has resulted from the car crash or the roadkill on Portola Road that took the life of a female puma and left 3 kittens as orphans. And I think that focusing on pumas makes some sense just in this in sort of my introductory approach to this for a number of reasons. One is that pumas have the biggest habitat of any of the mammals. And so when we talk about connectivity, it matters most to them because they need the biggest parcels and need to get between them. The second is that pumas are considered now for listing under the California Endangered Species Act. And in particular, there's concern about 6 subpopulations, one of which is the subpopulation called the Santa Cruz subpopulation, or the Northern California, Northern Coastal California subpopulation, which our pumas are part of. And then the third is that because of their threatened status and because of the other reasons of them having large habitats, large home ranges, and also requiring more wildlife corridors to get between them, there's actually been a tremendous amount of research on what they're doing. And so of most relevance probably to us is the Santa Cruz Puma Project, which probably most of you know about. It was started in 2008 by Professor Chris Wilmers at Santa Cruz, and they have been collaring pumas with GPS collars since that time. If you go to their website, which is a wonderful website, they have a puma tracker where they list 81 pumas that they have collared since that time. And you can use a feature of their website to actually use a time slider and trace the path of each of those collared animals while their GPS collar was functioning. And so just as a backdrop to this conversation, and I'll wrap this up quickly, I wanted to share sort of what I have personally learned using Puma Tracker and thinking about the pumas in our neighborhood. So to do that, I used Puma Tracker. I looked at the home ranges, which are mapped on their website. I looked at the puma that is closest to the town of Portola Valley and overlaps the most. And to be honest, I did this in 2022 when I learned that there was a puma that was moving through Portola Valley that had been collared. And it was I was in about the 3rd year of my own camera trapping at home, which was I was doing for other purposes to help foster some research. But I want to share with you some of what I've learned. So if this will work, I'm going to just share. I have a video that's less than 3 minutes, I promise. Okay, so in a minute you should, okay, here it is. So this just explains mostly what I've already told you, that this is basically going to be this is a screen recording that I made from the Puma Tracker. This is what the website looks like, except for the big green box that explains this little video. And these red squares down here at the lower right, or maybe you can't see them. Okay, maybe my cursor doesn't. Anyway, it says tracked locations. That's for a female puma, numbered 125. The red overlay there, that blotch over the map, is the home range that they mapped for her. And she is the puma that seemed to be using Portola Valley the most of their collared animals. So I wanted to find out more about that. Okay, so I'm going to, what you'll see is that time slider at the top is going to slide over to the right, because this is just a recording of me doing the puma track. Hopefully it'll run. So you're seeing the squares moving around Portola Valley, well, Foothills Park right now. And then they're coming up into, she's coming up into Portola Valley near some of your houses, going back into Foothills, Arrastradero, Los Altos Hills, back into Portola Valley, back into Arrastradero, Hills. So now we're up to April. We're only going to go to May on this, this exercise here. But you can see, so this is basically 3 months of activity by this particular female mountain lion. Okay, so I'm going to pause it there for a second. And okay. And one of the really cool features of this website is that when you're doing the time slider, you can click on any of those symbols and it actually gives you the timestamp when that recording was made. So I used that to try and connect with some of my camera images. I live on Brookside Drive. My property backs onto Puerto Madera Creek. It's less than an acre property, but it is a wildlife corridor and it doesn't take very much. So let me show you some videos from my cell cam. Just to give you an idea, and I'll just point out a few things as we're going on. Okay, so this is female 125. So this is my backyard. Puerto Madera Creek is just beyond the redwoods there. That was in July. This is 5 days later. This is a larger puma, uncollared, coming from the other direction 5 days later. Here he is scraping and scent marking. I have many videos of mountain lions from this camera and another camera at the site. I was trying to hone kind of the technology. Here's a lighter colored animal and somewhat slighter. And she was traveling with a partner. This is in November. So you can see if you look closely at those two animals, their markings are really different. And that's what I was mainly interested in. Here's the large male again, coming from the other direction. Just a few days after the pair went in the other direction. And here's the collared animal coming through again. So this is December 22nd of 2022 at 1 in the morning. That same night at 9 p.m., the male came back. So just to give you an idea of how much activity, you know, there are many more videos. And the reason I closed on this frame is that you can see these two lights in the background. You can probably see them through the redwood trees there. There are a few lights. That's my neighbor's house right on the other side of the creek. They are closer to the creek than I would like. But at 9 p.m., you know, there are people outside even at that hour. Anyway, what I wanted to emphasize is that our neighborhoods are wildlife corridors. It doesn't take a huge amount, but what this committee can do is think about how this all connects together, whether it's, you know, open space domain in particular, thinking about our open space parcels, thinking about creek corridors, thinking about the large parcels outside Portola Valley that these animals need to get to. There are only 40 pumas that are active in this population now. And so that is actually below the number that is needed to sustain genetic diversity over the very long term. And so the more that we can foster movement through Portola Valley to these other, you know, sort of large reserves, the better it'll be. Okay.
No, a clarifying question about your just recent remark. There are 40 mountain lions active in Portola Valley right now? Is that
No,
what you meant to say?
In the Santa Cruz Puma Project.
I see.
In
Oh,
our
wow.
region, and our region is the whole peninsula and beyond.
Oh,
So
that's not too many. Got it. Thank you. Right.
okay, so
Hugely many.
that's sort of my own personal inspiration a little bit, but I think, you know, I think everybody comes to this from both a scientific analytical perspective, but also an emotional perspective and a philosophical commitment to keeping Portola Valley safe for wildlife. So I just want to open it up with that.
Can I just jump in and say, those are the best backyard camera pictures I've ever seen of pumas. They're just amazing.
Well,
You're welcome. I am so.
Same
so-
here. I've never seen clips like that.
Thank you for saving them for today.
I'm so happy that you're a supporter of mine. Really? Okay, yeah.
And to add another emotional piece to this, I was very taken. Dana Breen posted, for those of you that don't frequent PV Forum, Dana Breen posted a picture of our mayor at base camp, I think it was, the Himalayas. There's a beautiful backdrop, and there were thistle and spruce and sage. Is that there? Fern, thank you. Fern and Fern on her jacket. So they've traveled far and wide now. Anyway, I thought it was pretty touching, Judah. Thank you for carrying the message on. Anyone else have any comments to make, particularly about Nona's presentation just then, because I had something to add after that. I just wanted to go back. Nona read from Assembly Bill 1889 just today. When I looked at it I looked at the legislative piece, which link you had online, when I read it myself about a month ago, there's big motivation for all of the communities to do their homework here, because we're being asked to record. So the committees working together here will be highly supportive to staff and very protective of our budget, because the Assembly Bill is looking to communities to incorporate into their general plan, both what exists now and how we can protect in the future. So it's a considerable job. And so I just can't thank you enough, Conservation Committee members, for being here today to support this emotionally and with woman power as we go forward. So committee, any comments? Or we could start to look at how we would approach this work, towards which I brought this lovely map that was, you won't be able to see it online, but for those of us here, this was the map that was offered in the fall through the Trails Committee. A member of the Trails Committee or one of their good friends made this incredible map. And I brought it just because I liked referring to it myself as I was thinking about the watersheds and the obvious places where we have existing corridors and what we can make of them, how fruitful they are. And towards that, I talked to one of Nona's fellow former members of, well, she's former, but he's still on staff at Jasper Ridge, Trevor today, just asking, or if he had some input now or going forward, and particularly whether he thought that Corte Madera was the pièce de résistance that it seemed to be. And he said, yeah, very much did deliver the preponderance of wildlife coming and going from Jasper Ridge is coming through the Corte Madera corridor, because they're coming right down Skyline and through Corte Madera and into the preserve. He doesn't have cameras going that full direction. I didn't mean to imply that, but he said very much they're coming in through those last parcels. And in second place, I asked him, and he said they're coming down from Skyla via Alembeek and Dennis Martin Creek. So there where Upper Lake is, and across the roadway that way, that being Woodside. And actually Corte Madera Creek itself has Woodside. I mean, it's Portola Valley on one side and Woodside for an important chunk on the other side. So we'll have some opportunities to reach out to them to support some of this work too.
One thing I might add to that, Betsy, is that, Jasper Ridge has really a lot of camera traps, but Trevor has told me that there's only one sighting he knows of of a collared animal. So even though there've been, 100 or more collared animals from the Santa Cruz group, they really aren't going into Jasperage to any large extent. I don't know why. Certainly there are mountain lions there, and so, but territories overlap, so it's kind of a paradox. But that might also mean that they aren't going, through Jasperage to other places as well. So
Is it,
it'd be interesting to think about.
do you know, can they estimate whether they think they've collared half the animals that are moving through? Has there been some effort to estimate that?
The only comment that I've read on that is that there are many more uncollared pumas than there are collared ones. Yeah, and I can say for certain that even in my backyard, I recognized 4 different individuals based on, sort of notches in their ears and different markings on their legs and things like that. I mean, that was part of the reason for trying to get really good images, was to see if you can recognize individuals. So there's one hand raised. I don't know if anyone.
So we have phone number ending in 3056. Is that Dana? Or the hand was up and now the hand is down. And so maybe that was an accidental hand. And they're muted. You may unmute yourself if you care to, but if that was an accident.
It is me, Betsy. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can
Um,
hear you.
Oh, no, my God, those pictures. I can't make myself get a camera because I feel when I'm here at nighttime that I'm here with them. I don't want to see it. I envision that they're around me, and of course the mother and the cubs were here.
Dana,
Why?
it's a little hard to hear you right now.
Yes, I don't want to have a camera because I feel that I'm here with them. And I knew it when the mother and the cubs were. Can you hear me now, Betsy? No?
Okay, so your voice is sometimes loud and sometimes soft.
All right. Can I try you again? Is this better?
Yes, that is more clear.
Okay.
So you were saying that you
Betsy.
didn't want to get it. We we're not soliciting camera traps lest you feel that you were trapped into volunteering. I think, have you gone away? Okay, I think.
No, I'm here.
Oh, good. I think what I heard you saying is that you didn't feel comfortable getting a camera trap. We wanted to
Well,
reassure you.
that's just why I don't have a camera. I don't have a camera because I like living in the dark with the animals. I don't want to know that they're here. So
Nice.
that's just one thing. But the thing that and poor Carter's going to hear me for the 10th time about the conservation committee came in front of the ASCC about fencing, and that I knew that the cubs were in on Georgia Lane and Tintern. Not Georgia Lane, yeah, back there, because there were no fences. There were no fences and the creek surrounded the area. So I hope that we can get a little more creative with our fencing in terms of wildlife. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay,
I was thinking
okay.
about what you said.
Okay, and
Thank you.
I feel strongly about that. Whether we don't allow fencing, perimeter fencing or whatever, but we have to allow them to move because their genetic diversity is really the most important thing. Is not them moving around. We need to keep them safe as a species.
Mhm.
So, I mean, that's kind of my gig. And anyway, thank you for talking about this tonight.
Oh, you're going to get to
unexpected
hear
from-
us talk about it ad nauseum. Well, I won't say ad nauseum. I will just say for a very long time.
Well, that's all I think
Just
about
because
it.
it's a fairly big project and we welcome everyone's participation. Anyone online that wants to jump aboard, please join us. So thank you for weighing in. So with that, then committee members, this is, we need your input and ideas as to how to use they're fairly small committees, our two committees, and it's going to be enough work that your creativity and approach suggestions will be valuable to us.
Thank you, Betsy. And I've read the text, of this bill, a couple times now. And the requirements, of it, are pretty rudimentary. However, the title is more broad. I think the amount of work, necessary, in order to comply is likely, pretty low. At the same time, I think there's a desire, within the town to have a much better, an almost leading position, on how to deal with wildlife corridors and connectivity. So I do think that there's, a thought process that will need to go into this, that utilizing, the town's GIS model, as an opportunity to potentially overlay, some of the scientific data, associated with the Puma project. I don't know if there's other tracking, relative, to, deer, coyotes, other, bobcats, other predators, versus prey, turkeys, and kind of, the wide variety of animals that many of which, are, less human averse and more, adapted to, the human interaction. So I do think that, some level of mapping, of the corridors that have been historic and currently exist, I think is appropriate. I think the town of Portola Valley, particularly has been already quite respectful, of, the conservation elements, associated with, wildlife corridors without actually, specifically calling them out. The creeks in particularly, are exceptional wildlife corridors. The ravines associated, with the tributary areas are likely, significant opportunities, for wildlife movement, protection and cover. So I don't have a vision or a plan, but I do think that, looking to those areas initially are going to be kind of the low-hanging fruit, that almost by their topography, their existing, plant and their existing cover, are going to be, places that we're going to naturally want to, maybe develop a corridor map. This was what I suggested, to the Conservation Committee, as a way, to start dealing with, with the fencing portions, that they're desirous, of the town, making some, some headway on. It also needs to make sure, we need to make sure, that, as we do this, that we don't overreach and create an unenforceable situation that essentially puts us suspect, for, protection of things that don't necessarily, I'm sorry for turning my head. I need to change the microphone technology. I want it to be attached.
I think I'm following you, but. when you
But
just-
in general, I think that, the thought process needs to, focus on, those things that are, clearly real and clearly scientific, rather than, hyperbole. In all my years volunteering in the town's ASCC, particularly when subdivisions, were being planned, wildlife corridors were often, talked about, in glorious, need and necessity to be preserved without knowing exactly what that meant. So of definition, that a common person can see and understand, needs to be, part of the charge.
Thank you for such thoughtful comments. And Terry, are you poised to say something? Not yet? Then if I could follow up.
No, I just want to say I agree with virtually all of what Carter has said. But to me, wildlife corridors seems to me seldom spoken of. It's almost a new concept out here. So I think that's the most important thing that we should be prepared to comment upon as we move along. So many of the things in the bill are already covered by our general plan, so that's a big help. I would say wildlife corridors is maybe one we're not quite up to speed on.
And
I too agree with what Carter and Harry have said. I think the one area where this committee has sort of special expertise and responsibility is there are a lot of open space parcels in Portola Valley that we've kind of lost track of, that are underutilized, they're small, and we don't really know what's happening with them because they are so small. I'm thinking of the Sinkies and some of the other parcels that at one point we talked about whether or not the town should try and sell them. So that seems like an opportunity to say, are there corridors out there even that are functional and that we don't know about? I think that to the extent that anything we do, whatever it might be, to the extent possible, it should be complementary to what conservation is thinking about rather than duplicative.
I appreciate that, the complementarity. And Carter, you want to respond to something in particular?
Not a response. It's really, kind of an amplification, I do think that as we start to think of maps, for corridors, there are going to be, high priority areas, versus low priority areas. And I think you could start to see that, as either a force field or a topographic map, where you start to see, places of concentration or necking points, that would need to be, high priorities, versus places where, there's a lot of room to roam already. And I think that, as the town starts to enter into, discussions or studies, identifying, kind of the broad circulation areas, and then where the necking points, currently exist, I think that those areas would want to be, higher priorities for preservation and protection.
I responded very positively to what all of you have said. Carter, when you said that you saw the opportunity for the town to take a leading role here, and that we had a long history, that we could really, you didn't imply rest on our laurels, but we have a lot of laurels underneath us. What I started thinking about was how the town is, our town staff is new, that there's real transition here, and to keep alive that open space ethic and to expand and enlarge upon it as the Wildlife Corridor and Roam to Rome Act both asks us to do and offers the opportunity to do. As I see the chance of working with conservation and potentially with a similar committee in Woodside, since we share some of these corridors. I just find it a very exciting and promising time to protect the resources that caused us all to want to live here. With that, I thought I would draw your attention to something that this is a public document. It's a parcel map that shows 3 parcels from Portola Valley. 3 parcels from Portola Valley, the last 3 parcels from Portola Valley that precede the Jasper Ridge Biological Preserve. So as you're looking at it, the Jasper Ridge Biological Preserve would be, I don't know if this is appropriately north-south. No, there's the north. Yeah, it would be due north-ish. And I marked out the conservation easement on these last 3 parcels before Corte Madera Creek enters Jasper Ridge is about a football field in oh yes, thank you. We're trying to share this a little bit with people online. The point that I'm making is that the generosity of this conservation easement that was afforded by Tennessee Ernie Ford to wildlife was considerable. So the creek is quite well protected there. And looking at this map caused me to wonder what was going on the other side of the creek and what the remainder of the parcels look like along the corridors. So I thought that might be, particularly given Trevor, who knows more about camera trapping and wildlife corridors than anybody in the region probably, or don't take my word for it, top 10 anyway, that the Corte Madera Creek would be the perfect place to start the focus of our collective attention and would be the lowest hanging fruit, as Carter suggested. So this gave me reason to hope there was going to be a lot to work with.
I want to just make a couple of quick comments. One is, my hope would be that Turtle Valley has a history of, trying to do conservation right. It's the reason we were incorporated, in fact, largely. And that I'd like to think that we would remain one of the sort of leading lights in how you deal with this, because the whole area obviously is densifying, et cetera. And that it would be nice if we could get ahead of the problem a little bit, in that what we can see coming down the pike towards us because of what's happening at the state level and just the pressures of the population and et cetera, is that there's going to be more density here now, that some of our large lots are going to be subdivided. So instead of having large lots, we're going to have smaller lots. And every time that happens, there's a whole new set of fences that go up. So instead of looking at this open space that happens sort of automatically, because the Westridge parcels don't have perimeter fencing and they are their own wildlife corridor, if you want. We might start to lose that, which is one of the reasons that conservation wanted to start talking about fences now before it's a problem, before a whole bunch of those big lots or smaller lots and the fences have already gone up. So we're trying to be proactive, and we hope that you will be proactive with us. Number two is, I think when you think in terms of it, just in terms of connectivity, we sort of narrow our own focus down, and that we need to be thinking about is permeability. For these animals
Yes.
not only have to get from A to B, they have to sort of live along the way. They have to have nooks and crannies and things, so that we're not just thinking about channels that they might get funneled through, but how do they continue to live with us well, which is why we would like to minimize restrictive kinds of fencing and all the other things that happen. Thanks.
Thanks, good point.
Actually, right, adding to what Judy just said, the one thing that goes through my mind is when you look at a wildlife corridor, you could argue that the whole of Portola Valley is a wildlife corridor. And then you could say, this is a wildlife corridor, and then you have priorities, A, B, you can say, more green in Westridge at the moment, total green on the ranch because it's completely permeable, and smaller parcels like Puerto Madera that would be red, no permeability. But still, from a concept, the animals have to go from west to east, from north, whatever. And one of the things nobody ever talks about is Jasper Ridge needs to do something about their 10-foot, 8-foot, 10-foot perimeter fence. Because one of the reasons why all the animals are coming in at the creek, because nowhere else they can. And I'm not surprised that there are not that many mountain lions in Jasper Ridge, because how are they going to get in? They would have to jump. So anyway, but that's a side point. That's not part of Portola Valley, but it's open space.
These points may merge at some point down the
Yeah.
road. And that's why I think, as you point, that we're starting now, that we're getting a head start on what is inevitably coming our direction.
Yeah.
Will allow us to, I think, especially that we're going to stay low with what's out there, what exists right now. If it needs to be improved upon, what is the obvious next steps?
And the one thing I would just like to stress, there is the official summary of the bill text. And the one thing,
I'm sorry, say that again, the official summary
the
of
official summary of the bill
Oh,
text.
thank
And one of the key sentences, I think, is this bill would additionally require the conservation element to consider the effect of development within the jurisdiction on the movement of wildlife and habitat connectivity. So that one sentence sort of says it all. I mean, the bill is
Yes.
very thick.
you.
And then to reiterate what Judy was saying, perimeter fencing and thinking along those lines is going to be key here and in Jasper Ridge. And that's my input at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Judith, did I see you motion? You're good? Okay, fantastic. Well, if the committee members have anything more to add, this would be the good time to do it because we might have just about covered everything.
There's an extraordinary irony on the Santa Cruz Puma Project website that there are no lions, collared or not collared, that are showing up in Jasper Ridge.
Really?
None.
Is that, can you elaborate on that, Nona? That there are no, because I've met a mountain lion in Jasper Ridge
Right.
personally.
So there's only been, according to Trevor, he knew of only one photograph of a collared animal in Jasper Ridge. And that's an indication of abundance. That's not a direct measure of abundance there because, even when I was trying to correlate what I was recording with what came up on Puma Tracker, there are gaps in when the signals come through. But if you don't see anything over, that many years, it's a pretty good indicator that they're not going in.
Intriguing and ironic. I think that we have the opportunity too, as you have both pointed out, to think about fencing, but obstacles, whatever the obstacles are, for the greater species, not mountain lions alone. So thank you for raising that issue. And thank you, committee members, for another great meeting, and Nona for your preparation and fabulous, fabulous backyard photographs. Our next meeting, June 5th. So far as you know, will all committee members be able to be here? Because following that, we're going to have some scheduling difficulties, as I tried to highlight, just to make clear when I listed the July, August, and September dates. Those would have been our regular meeting dates, but aren't available due to town picnics and July 4th holidays and such. So during those 3 months, we'll undoubtedly meet. But I think it's going to be much better to plan that out as we did last year by email when the time is right, depending upon how things move with Fogarty and other hot pressing items. So seeing no more hands raised, may I hear a motion to adjourn?
I so move.
Thank you, Carter. Second?
Second.
Thank you, Gary. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes.